This episode is brought to you by Ghost Patch. Ghost Patch is a law enforcement-owned and operated company specializing in patches, coins, and flex shields. Quality is top priority with low prices. They always offer free design work and never charge mold or setup fees. Stop letting the big companies rip you off and check out Ghost Patch at ghostpatch.com and ghostpatchcustom.com. Now to the next story.
Ianni's is usually crowded and busy on a typical Friday night, but not tonight. The doors are locked, the place is closed.
Well, everyone is so distraught and upset, and in respect to the families, we felt that it would really be best. It's a real blow, and everyone really is in a state of shock at this point.
It's quiet and calm inside the bar tonight, but this is where chaos broke out shortly after midnight last night. Police say a man came into the bar with a gun, shot his dance partner after a brief argument, and then walked down the bar shooting. 6 people were killed, a 7th person was seriously injured. The crime has left many people in a state of shock.
It's shocking. That's a large number of people to be killed at one time, especially under the circumstances where they were strangers and it was a random act.
Awful waste of life for no reason whatsoever. These people were wonderful, kind people who had, as far as I know, never done anything to anyone to harm anyone.
Within 3 hours of the murders, Dallas police had arrested 39-year-old Abdelkrim Belachheb. He's been charged with murder, and he's being held tonight on $500,000 bond.
Because of Abdelkrim Belachheb's actions, the way the state punishes convicted mass murderers is changing. 6 lives were snuffed out in this bar, Ianni's, by Belachheb. When the Moroccan was convicted, he received the maximum penalty in Texas, 6 life sentences. He could not get the death penalty because he didn't commit another crime or kill a police officer in the process. But the laws change next week. Dallas County Assistant DA Ryder Scott is reviewing the 81 new state laws that will have an impact on law enforcement. The major change was sparked by the Belachheb murders.
It would allow us to utilize the death penalty for that person, a sociopath, in other words, who would wantonly kill more than one person.
Scott successfully prosecuted Belachheb. He helped form the mass murder bill and says it will be one of the best weapons law enforcement will have.
Even if it does not have an overall deterrent effect across the board, it certainly gives us a viable alternative in punishment for the type of individual that would commit this very heinous type of vicious crime.
June 29th, 1984, just after midnight. In 52 days, the Republican National Convention will bring the eyes of the nation to Dallas, Texas. The city of Dallas and the Dallas Police Department are preparing for this major-scale event. In July, 2 officers will lose their lives in a helicopter crash while scouting locations related to the convention. In August, President Ronald Reagan will give a rousing speech before accepting the formal nomination, leading to his second White House term. But before all of that, an upscale restaurant and nightclub in far north Dallas will become the scene of what still stands as the largest incident of mass murder in the city of Dallas. In a matter of minutes, 6 people will be dead and another seriously wounded. As a result, Texas law would change and the nation's immigration process would be heavily scrutinized. This is a story which, despite its significance to the history of the city, seems to be lost to time. Dallas in 1984 was a vastly different place than it had been 2 decades earlier when President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated on the west side of downtown in Dealey Plaza. For the rest of the 1960s, that event would make a pariah of the city which had already been branded as the City of Hate. But by the end of that decade, the city's image had greatly shifted. Dallas was given the title of All-America City in 1970. The Dallas Cowboys, led by Tom Landry, had become America's team, and a primetime soap opera bearing the city's name had become hugely popular worldwide. By the mid-1980s, the city was burgeoning, prosperous, international, and even a bit sexy. State legislation legalizing liquor by the drink had passed in 1971 and birthed a hot Dallas nightclub and party scene. The far north end of Dallas was booming as tech and financial companies based there were practically printing money. Dallas's liquor laws prevented the sale of liquor by the drink throughout most of the city, but this was easily skirted through the purchase of a membership in a restaurant's private club for a few dollars. Singles-only apartment complexes were still legal and made the Dallas dating scene one of the hottest in the country. Ianni's Restaurant and Club at 12801 Midway Road was the sort of place someone looking for a good time might end up. Good food, cocktails, dancing, and upscale clientele. The men wore three-piece suits, the women wore designer skirts and dresses. Both men and women had freshly coiffed hair in the latest styles of the 1980s. If you were looking for a chic entertainment on a Thursday night, this was a good landing spot. Late in the evening of Thursday, June 28th, the Mike Harris Quartet is playing in the bar room of Ianni's. Seated in the bar that night are a handful of regulars. Linda Lowe, 43 years of age, a pianist and singer herself, has migrated over to Ianni's from another nearby club after providing the entertainment during that establishment's happy hour. Upon arriving, she meets her friend, Janice Smith, a 45-year-old award-winning real estate agent. Janice has already been at Ianni's for a few hours, sitting in a booth with 32-year-old Marcell Ford, a United States Air Force veteran and a regular at Ianni's. The three of them then move to the U-shaped bar in order to better see the evening's musical entertainment. As the clock approaches midnight, 45-year-old Ligia Kozlowski, a relatively newcomer to Dallas by way of Chicago, enters the bar room and takes a seat on one of the swiveling chairs positioned around the bar's perimeter. Frank Parker, a local pimp who was known by sight to many DPD officers, was so familiar to the Ianni staff that he was in the kitchen making himself something to eat. 36-year-old Joe Manassi, a master mechanic for some of the highest-end car dealerships in the area, entered, sat down at the bar, and ordered a drink. John McNeil, a 38-year-old businessman working on a project for the United States Department of Agriculture, was seated with two other friends at a four-top table just adjacent to the bar. Approximately 20 other patrons were enjoying the music and company at Ianni's that night. Also at Ianni's that night was a 5'6", 130-pound, 39-year-old resident alien with light-skinned Arabic features, a French accent, and a mysterious persona. Dressed in a wide-collared, three-piece suit, Abdelkrim Belachheb was a con artist with a propensity for violence, whose lies and deceit were catching up with him. He was drunk, desperate for money, and looking for female companionship. Before we get further into the story, I'm going to hand it off to Joe to explain a little bit more about today's episode.
Hello, folks. I also want to introduce the voice you've been hearing thus far, Sergeant Dan Mosier. He's you might have heard him on a couple other intros that he's done. He's a lot more eloquent than I am, so he's reading this. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks.
This is your official first episode.
Yeah, it's interesting to be here. I've heard so many of the podcasts, and now to actually be recording an episode, not just a little intro. So, and I appreciate you saying I'm more eloquent. I don't think of myself as eloquent. So
yeah, well, I think the listeners probably have a few years of listening to me, and then they're going to hear you, and I think they'll be able to make a good judgment on that. So actually, a couple of years ago, this episode has been in the works, or at least in talks for you. You know, you want to tell the listener how we kind of stumbled on this case?
It was just an interesting thing. We thought, well, this story seems to kind of be lost to time, and we wanted people to hear about it because we want this to be known. You know, these people died, and they should be remembered.
I was living in Dallas at this time, and I was 10 years old. when this happened in 1984. And whenever you brought it to my attention, it was like I started looking up the case. You sent me like the Wikipedia on it, and we started reviewing it. And then we found out there's actually a book.
Yes,
there's a book a very, very detailed book that I admit that Dan has done a deeper dive in this entire case, and he's done a lot of hard work on this, and that's why he's leading the show. That's why he is reading the script. We're going to try something new on this show. Most of our podcasts and episodes have been just conversation / interview. This is going to be more scripted story time and conversation about the broken up into segments. So you're going to hear a lot of scripted, which you've already heard some, and you're going to hear we're going to pause and we're going to talk about this crime, because I know that true crime podcasts are the number one podcast in the world, especially case studies like this. In this case here, like Dan said, that it has been lost in time. I mean, you have 6 people that lost their life. Another person got shot and they lived. And to this day, it is the most loss of life in one single incident in our city's history. And that says a lot. July 7th, 2016, pushed this. We lost 5 that night. But I'm surprised that it's still the largest loss of life in this city.
Because even in some of the completely adjacent suburbs to Dallas, there's been larger losses of life in some of these incidents. So it's interesting that in the actual city limits of Dallas, this is it. Yeah, and
this is a fascinating case on so many levels, not just because of sadly the body count of the offense. You're gonna hear how unique and odd the suspect is and how the case went, and also from actually changing state law that we now go by today. In 1984, the laws were written a certain way, and this landmark case that happened right here in Dallas, Texas in 1984 changed all of that. So Dan, I want you to tell the listener a little bit more about this suspect and his background that led him to Dallas in 1984.
Named for a 20th century Moroccan revolutionary, Abdelkrim Belachheb was born on November 24, 1944, in Beni Ammar, Morocco, the fourth of 11 children. His family was of Berber origin, a culture which is relatively unknown to the Western world. Abdelkrim's telling of his life story depended on what hour of what day of what week it was, and who he was telling his stories to. Either he was raised in abject poverty, or in the home of his rich grandfather, an imam with a castle capable of housing up to 100 people. Belachheb claimed to have been raised in a strict Shia Muslim environment, despite the fact the Muslim tradition in Morocco is Sunni and the Shia tradition is virtually non-existent there. As part of his religious upbringing, he claimed to have partaken in a ritual in which he struck himself in the head with an axe, which rendered him unconscious for 8 months. He also claimed his father's act of bestowing upon him the name of a revered Moroccan revolutionary was cause for the patriarch to be sent to prison. However, the name Abdelkrim is reportedly as common to the region as Charlie is to the Western world. Some of Belachheb's other outlandish claims regarding his past included the following. He claimed that at the age of 12, he was a revolutionary engaging in guerrilla tactics who bombed a constable's office as an act of defiance against French occupation. At the age of 13, he was left on his own to fend for himself and survived in the gutters of Casablanca by selling his body. He claimed that after escaping Morocco, he moved to Europe in order to study law, engineering, or medicine in order to help the people of Morocco. And he also claimed that while in Europe, he hustled his way through jobs such as driver, handyman, and waiter, which somehow led him to delivering luxury cars to the Middle East, which then led to him making money runs for liberation forces in Morocco and other northern African countries. Throughout the course of his life, Belachheb would make unbelievable claims regarding his upbringing, skill sets, sexual conquests, and education, with other things. What can be nailed down about Belachheb's life is much less grandiose or exciting. The details reveal that he was much more of a troubled individual rather than a skilled playboy, which would make sense as to why he would wind up committing mass murder in Dallas, Texas. Belachheb was a young troublemaker, causing problems for his family. The story of him firebombing the constable's office is generally regarded as true. However, this was an act of basic juvenile delinquency, not of one of patriotic revolution against an occupying government. His troublemaking actions as a youth would force his family to move from Beni Ammar to the larger city of Fez. What is known for sure is that on June 21st of 1963, Belachheb assaulted a fellow Moroccan with a knife. This was the same year he went to Europe, so his story of moving there for altruistic and humanitarian goals was likely to cover the real motive behind this relocation, which was to flee from possible legal consequences. Whatever the reason, Belachheb ended up in Europe, though his exact port of entry is unknown. As a Moroccan in French territory, Belachheb was fluent in French and even had a bit of a French accent, so it is believed that he first entered through that country. Between late 1963 and the summer of 1965, he was refused work documents in Switzerland and the Netherlands. At some point he ended up in Spain, where he claims he had no money for food and became an alcoholic due to the ubiquity of cheap wine there. At some point he ended up in Brussels, Belgium, where he became known to authorities and jail officials in short order. On August 20th, 1965, he assaulted 2 people in Brussels. A few months later, on November 5th, he assaulted and struck a woman. In December, he would attack 2 men with a knife and threaten another at a cafe. He was incarcerated for about a month from December 1966 to January of 1967. After being released, he broke out windows and homes and attacked another man with a knife. In less than 2 years, he had injured at least 11 people. He was arrested twice in 8 days in December of 1967. Eventually, his criminal charges, which in addition to assaults now included possession of a prohibited firearm, caught up to him. The judges assigned to his cases stated the following: "These infractions constitute collective damages of such proportions that they cannot be sanctioned by anything other than the strongest punishment applicable. This harsh punishment equated to a 5-year suspended prison sentence and a fine of 4,000 Belgian francs, which is about $15,850 in today's U.S. currency. As far as his prison sentence, he was credited with time served and free to move on to other exploits. Belachheb's exploits after this consisted of more trips to jail for fighting. He also chased women in the Belgian nightclub scene and at some point learned to service heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. His skills in the HVAC field were quite extensive, as was noted by someone in the United States many years later, when he was able to fix a system most believed beyond repair. Belachheb's adventures in the Brussels nightclub scene eventually led him to meeting a Belgian woman 6 years his senior. On October 7, 1967, the two would marry and 4 months later would become parents to a daughter. In interviews years later, Jenny Pio would recount how Karim, as she knew him, was intense and violent. He was demanding and abusive toward Jenny during their 14-year relationship. Marriage did not settle Belachheb down, as he was unfaithful to Jenny multiple times during the course of their marriage and continued getting into violent fights which landed him behind bars. It is estimated that he spent nearly 1/3 of his time in Europe in some sort of lockup. His alcoholism led to hospitalization. When later interviewed regarding all of these incidents, Belachheb, of course, placed the blame on others, claiming they would pick on him because he was a foreigner. How this accounts for the reported incidents of violence in his native country was never explained. At some point, Belachheb ended up in Kuwait, where, of course, he was arrested. However, this time, the charge was not merely fighting, but robbery, and this would land him in a Kuwaiti prison for 2 years. Belachheb would later claim that this was a high-end robbery set up by a Casablanca mafia leader. Then at some point he would claim he committed this act in order to provide aid to Berber revolutionaries.
This guy sounds like, in his mind, he was like a Moroccan James Bond.
It's interesting as you read about him how he had a very high opinion of himself. But I don't know how he got as far as he did to where we're going to get to on June 29th of 1984. How he managed to bluff his way through life this far, because you really look at it, he didn't really have skills.
He fell forward on a lot of things.
He did. He didn't have an education, we can tell. he had some skills, but he just bluffed his way through life. I mean, it's kind of crazy. For 20 years, he just sort of BS'd everybody.
Yeah, I mean, people do it over here in the United States a lot, but over there, I mean, he had it down, being a professional just bullshitter.
Yes, and he most people here, they stay in the same like zip code, but this guy got different countries, came overseas, got here, was here for several years, went to several states and cities here before it all finally caught up to him.
You know, it really is. I read this as well. I didn't go as deep into the research as you did, but seeing that he actually had a relationship that lasted 14 years.
Yeah, when I had read that, I thought, man, there's no way. When I typed this down, I thought 14 years. How did he stay 14 years married with all the stuff he was pulling? And of course, we're about to see why it fell apart here.
Yeah, we know that poor wife Jenny. I mean, she put up with a lot, physical and mental abuse from this guy, and he really is kind of like a relationship terrorist.
Yeah, he's a philanderer. He was using people all throughout his life, and you see that as we'll go through, that he was just using people to get money, to get where he wanted to go, but he never cared about anybody. Whatever the reason behind Belachheb's latest venture into crime, he returned to Brussels in 1978 and impregnated Jenny once again, this time in hopes of siring a male heir. Their second child was a daughter, born sometime in 1979. Shortly after the birth of this child, Belachheb would take his abuse of Jenny to another level. On November 24th, 1979, he planned a celebration for his 35th birthday, in which one of his former mistresses and her new lover would come to his home for a dinner which Jenny would prepare. When he opened the refrigerator and discovered the ingredients for the meal he wanted to make were not there, he beat Jenny senseless with a shoe and a wooden statue. When his 12-year-old daughter attempted to intervene, he slapped her. His shirt was so immersed in his wife's blood, he went to place it in the laundry, which gave her the chance to escape. Jenny was treated at a hospital for 4 fractured ribs, a broken hand, and a punctured lung. She spoke with Belgian police and filed charges against him. When questioned about his actions, Belachheb stated he didn't recall any of the previous night's events, a response which was common for him when confronted with his own violent actions. Facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Belachheb fled Belgium and made his way back to Morocco. His father welcomed him and gave him land, but the prospect of an agrarian life in Morocco lacked the pizzazz he had become accustomed to during his 14 years in Europe. He began looking for a way out of his native culture, but returning to Belgium was impossible, and other countries reportedly, according to Belachheb himself, rejected him. The European Convention on Extradition of 1957 might have also ensured his entry into most European countries would have been a sure ticket to a Belgian prison. Belachheb set his sights on the United States, a country which would not reject him, nor give much scrutiny to his background and request to enter its borders. Belachheb applied for a visitor visa at the U.S. consulate in Casablanca. What was written on his application will never be known, as it no longer exists. This is due to a policy created in the aftermath of the Iranian hostage crisis, which required the State Department to destroy visa applications after 1 year. What can be determined is that Belachheb lied on at least 2 of the questions. The first question was, have you lived in Morocco for the previous 5 years? And the second question would have been, do you have a criminal record or history of mental problems? In order to be granted a visa, he would have had to answer yes to the former and no to the latter. The immigration system in place at the time relied on the applicant to self-report any nefarious past, and it appears little background investigation was done to verify the answers provided were truthful. On July 17th of 1980, Abdelkrim Belachheb was granted a non-immigrant visa to the United States. He was later authorized to travel to the United States for a period not to exceed 6 months, beginning on April 22nd of 1981. Belachheb's first stop in the U.S. was Los Angeles. He knew little English and claimed he always ordered the same food 3 times a day because he did not know how to say anything besides pancakes. Taking on several more Western-style names such as Bob or Bill, he eventually settled on Charlie, and this was his new moniker in the U.S. He also worked as a waiter at restaurants in the area, which was a violation of the terms of his visa, which forbade him from gaining employment while in the U.S. It was at one of these jobs where he impressed his superiors with the proficient HVAC repair skills he had picked up at some point in his life. On October 22, 1981, Belacheb's visa expired, and he officially became an illegal alien in the U.S. This was around the same time that he made his move to Dallas.
So he went from Morocco to Kuwait, all across Europe, and he shows up in pancakes.
Pancakes, yes. He never learned any English other than pancakes, according to him.
According to him. Okay. So pancakes, then Bob and Bill.
And finally Charlie.
And then here he is in Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. What led Belacheb to Dallas is a mystery. Perhaps it was the prospect of landing a lucrative job in an area which had experienced a massive boom in construction and other industries. Perhaps it was the allure of the nightlife scene and the seemingly endless supply of beautiful women he knew he could woo. Perhaps it was because he knew someone who knew someone else who had a home in the city where he could hope to reside. Perhaps it was because he had now overstayed his visa and believed Dallas would be a good place to lie low. Or perhaps it was a mosaic of several of these things, which led him to a home on Listy Street, where he took up residence with a couple and their friend. One of Belacheb's first endeavors in Dallas was to learn English. He enrolled at a local language school, but was remembered by his teacher as a poor student who would arrive for class smelling of alcohol and then argue with instructors. Belacheb had seemingly immersed himself in the Dallas nightlife, prowling for women who could give him attention, money, and sex. Dallas's nightclub scene easily provided this for him. Belacheb attended a party in the spring of 1982, where he would meet his ticket to remain in the U.S., a twice-divorced woman who was 15 years his senior. Joanne O'Brien was not rich by Belacheb or really anyone's standards, but she did own her own home. She and Belacheb began dating, and a fire at her home in the fall of '82 would speed their relationship along. Belacheb oversaw the renovation of her residence, and the two of them moved into the newly restored home in November. This was convenient, as his welcome at the home on Listy had only lasted about 4 months. On May 28, 1983, Joanne and Abdelkrim were married at a Justice of the Peace in Sherman, Texas. This ensured Belacheb could not be deported from the U.S. On January 16, 1984, Belacheb was declared a permanent resident alien of the U.S. after repeating the same lies he told to gain a visa in the first place. This new status meant he could not be deported and was also able to legally seek and obtain employment. 6 months prior to obtaining permanent resident alien status, Belacheb committed another violation of federal law. He purchased a firearm from a local pawn shop despite not being legally eligible to do so. In order to make this purchase, he had to affirm that he was not, first of all, a person who had been convicted in any court of a crime punishable by more than 1 year of confinement. He was in Kuwait, a fugitive from justice, which he was in Belgium, and an alien illegally in the United States.
He checked a lot of boxes.
He did. Belacheb's lies on the ATF Form 4473 permitted him to purchase a Smith & Wesson Model 459 semi-automatic pistol, which was chambered in 9mm, bearing the serial number 799829. This model was an updated version of a model released in the 1970s, was relatively new to the market, and was capable of holding 15 live rounds in the magazine and an additional round in the chamber. 393 days after he purchased this pistol, Abdelkrim Belachheb would use it to end 6 lives.
That is pretty chilling. 393 days.
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought. He buys that, and then there was many other things that were set in motion. A little over a year later, he would be in custody.
And you wonder why he bought the pistol. I mean, it's not uncommon. People in Texas, we like our guns and all that, and apparently he had, I guess, had a firearm in Belgium because he got charged with it. But what was his purpose in buying that? I mean, I don't think he thought, hey, I'm going to kill 6 people, 393 days from now. But he thought enough of himself that I need to have a gun.
Yeah.
And I'm going to break the law to get it. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that it sounds like this guy, there's probably not many days of his life that he did not break the law in some way.
True.
Whether it even just as, I'm sure that he did a lot of drunk driving. going from these bars.
Yeah, how he didn't get picked up before this incident, I don't know, because he sounds like he'd pretty much drunk most of his life. He'd shown up morning drunk to English class.
Well, and then this poor Joanne. I mean, she's taking this guy in, and I don't know what she saw in him.
Yeah, you wonder about those things, especially with his first marriage, and then this one. She's 15 years older than him. Sounds like she's got her own life going, and then this guy enters. And why did she think, oh, this is, I want to be with this guy?
Well, he's clearly one of these manipulators, slick shit, narcissist that can talk he could talk a cat off a fish cart, and then he's in her life, had the house fire, and he's hero stepping in, taking over the renovation, whatever that entailed.
I'm surprised he never ran for office,
Yeah, it's just fascinating seeing this guy's ascent and descent.
Yeah, it was a quick descent, but it was a very slow ascent, and you wonder how, like we said, how did he get this far?
Yeah, well, where everybody bitches about the immigration laws now, but look, in that back then, it was more on the honor system than it even is. It's in now.
Yeah, it was not a good system, and it's funny that the way that he got in, the way he skirted the law, and the reason we can't ever go back is because they had issues with another issue, and it just curtails and spirals downward. Belachheb's marriage to Joanne ran similar parallels to his first marriage. Employment instability, infidelity, and violence. Both of his wives had known him by a title other than his true name. To his first wife, he was Karim. To his second wife, he was Charlie, but never, of course, Abdelkrim. In both of his marriages, Abdelkrim appears to have been more interested in citizenship than true love, exploitation rather than benevolence. With both wives, he was violent to the point of hospitalization. Joanne's keepsakes from her marriage included a fracture line on her skull, which was the result of his assault on her. The marriage had one major difference from his first, that being that this one was much shorter than his to Jenny. On June 19th of 1984, Joanne and Abdelkrim ate dinner together. She then told him, "I never intend to see or call you again," after which she left. The next 10 days were a downward spiral for Belachheb. His employment in Dallas had not been particularly stable. He had worked as a waiter and a maitre d', but could not hold a position for any length of time. At some point he had been employed as a business broker at a company in North Dallas, a position for which he possessed zero skills. His lack of English, business experience, combined with his chronic absenteeism, were grounds for dismissal after just 2 months. Attempts to start his own business utilizing his mechanical skills had never made it past the stage of mere discussion. Belachheb at some point found work as a limousine driver. It was during this venture when he would meet a local businessman who took a fancy to Belachheb and thought he might be good selling luxury automobiles. Belachheb made claim to have sold these cars in Europe, and his international features surely caught the man's eye. All the man's associates also seemed to like Belachheb, save for one, his girlfriend, Linda Lowe. Initially, she thought Belachheb seemed nice, but quickly soured on him and found him creepy and concerning.
Lowe will come up later in this story, correct?
She's going to end up on one of his victims here.
Yeah, that's really...
It's very strange.
It is really strange.
World. Big city, small world, right?
Listening to this guy's story and his inability to have relationships, inability to hold down a job or be good at something, reminds me of another guy that wandered around Dallas in 1963.
Yeah.
He
committed a pretty heinous crime himself.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
He thought very highly of himself too. He left, went to the USSR, came back thinking he was going to be greeted by media, and of course he never got the attention he was seeking. And
abusive to his wife.
Yeah. Seeking attention, trying to do something to get himself noted.
Grandiose ideas. And reading about this case and hearing about his escalate and his many failures, he just kept stepping on his D throughout his life. And then he gets up here, and I think what happened in Ianni's was a culmination of it just boiled over.
Right.
He just a lifetime of failure, relationships and professional life. It just the anger finally boiled over, and he couldn't stop that rage.
Yeah. He was desperate, and he didn't have any other way to manifest his anger. He had no woman to go home and beat up, and no job, no nothing, so he decides to do what he ends up doing. 2 days before he would enter Ianni's and end Linda's life, Belachheb berated the staff of his latest service industry job. The next day, June 28, 1984, he was fired by the manager over the phone. Sometime that day, he received a phone call from his first wife informing him his eldest daughter had failed her past year in school. At some point on June 28th, he made attempts to obtain some of Joanne's assets to no avail. One of his former housemates on Listy Street had lent him money and had asked him for repayment 10 days earlier. At 7 p.m. on the evening of the 28th, Belachheb collected his last paycheck from his latest ex-employer. He had no immediate prospects for work, and everything he had was obtained with the cash and credit of others. The three-piece suit he wore had been purchased through fraudulent use of an employer's credit card. His vehicle, a white Chevrolet Caprice station wagon, which was more prototypical of a 1980s family on the go and not a mysterious international playboy, had been financed by a co-signed loan. Whatever cash Belachheb had in his pocket was already promised to other people, so he would use it to do what he did best: consume alcohol and try to woo women. Belachheb's path to Ianni's that night is not entirely retraceable. He claimed to have started drinking around 4:30 p.m., 2.5 hours before being handed the wages from his last job. Linda Lowe had been providing happy hour musical entertainment at Farfallo's, 2 miles east of Ianni's on LBJ Freeway. Belachheb was a patron there at some point that evening and would have heard Linda play. This was corroborated by John McNeil, the only survivor of a Belachheb bullet, as he had enjoyed a drink there prior to meeting friends at Ianni's. McNeil had taken note of Belachheb while at Farfallo's due to the way he was dressed and the manner he carried himself. Around 10:30, Linda migrated to Ianni's. Belachheb arrived around the same time. He quickly took to looking for female companionship for the night, first hitting on a patron, then on the singer for the Mike Harris Quartet. He struck out with both attempts, but did not give up. By many witness accounts, he spoke with most of the women present and even danced with several, but his attention was fixed on Marcell Ford. Marcell was a regular at Ianni's, as were most of the patrons that evening. Belachheb had been spotted there earlier in the week when he had purchased a membership at the restaurant's club, and by his telling, she had gone home with him that night. However, this should be taken with a grain of salt, as Abdelkrim Belachheb was more likely to spin outlandish tales than tell the truth. Whatever their prior knowledge of each other was, his attention was focused primarily on her. Marcell was one of the younger patrons at Ianni's that night. She was a young, single professional woman who could hold her own and owned a home in a nearby suburb. When men crossed the lines she set for them, she pushed back. Her father, the proprietor of the Star Liquor Store at the corner of San Jacinto and Lamar in downtown Dallas, had been shot to death in a robbery of his shop in 1978. Her mother ran a restaurant next door and was used to dealing firmly with drunk jackasses. Marcell was beautiful, tough, and quick to put men who got out of line back on the straight road. Marcell's status as a frequent patron of Ianni's was likely due to the establishment's reputation as an upscale establishment where a lady could enjoy a high-class time without being ogled by creepy men. Linda Lowe may have enjoyed that aspect of the place, but she was also a lover of good music, and had gone there to see the evening's entertainment. Linda was from small-town Texas, raised in strict religious fundamentalism. After high school, she left the shackles of high-demand religion and pursued her own love of music. Her skills on the piano would be utilized at churches throughout the region, but her real love was entertainment. For over 20 years, she had applied her talents throughout the DFW area, and even had a stint playing in Las Vegas. Few would have guessed this talented and beautiful woman was old enough to have 2 grandchildren. The U-shaped bar at Ianni's featured high stools with winged backs. The bar itself was trimmed out in dark hardwoods typical of the era. Janice Smith sat on the corner of the right side of the U. To her right, completing that side of the U, were Linda Lowe and Marcell Ford. No patrons were seated on the right side of the bar past Marcell's position. Legia Kozlowski sat on the bottom right corner of the U, and to her left sat Joe Manassi. Other patrons sat around the bottom and left side of the U. John McNeil and two friends sat at a table several feet behind Janice, Linda, and Marcell's position. Abdelkrim Belachheb approached Marcell at some point, and a conversation ensued. According to witnesses, they had been engaged in conversations all night, all initiated by Belachheb, and it was clear Marcell wanted him to go away. What was said in that final conversation will never be truly known, as one half of the discussion was murdered a few minutes later, and the other half was a noted liar. Marcell said something to Abdelkrim, and he attempted to put his arm around her, but she either pushed him back or slapped him. Linda and Janice then laughed. According to witnesses, they were engaged in their own conversation and not paying attention to the exchange between Marcell and Belachheb, though he likely believed they were laughing at him. Belachheb turned and walked out of the establishment. An employee of the location followed him briefly to make sure he left and observed him get into his vehicle.
So I kind of want to stop here and just kind of chat about this. This is starting to unfold, and Belachheb is...
He has a choice here.
Yeah, he has a choice just to put that crappy station wagon and drive and get out of there, or go to the next club. But he didn't go that route.
Nope. He takes a very unfortunate choice and very violent choice here. But yeah, this is like the two paths in life. What's your choice going to be here? We know where it's going, but sad that he's about to choose the wrong path.
In the parts of reading this book that he was already failing that night at what he was trying with the ladies, and life's failures start stacking up in that night, and then getting brushed off by Marcell, and then him walking out thinking they're laughing at him. That really was just kind of
that was a breaking point.
That was lighting the fuse.
Yeah, and you're going to see here in a second, he sits in his car for a while. So this isn't like he just in a rage. He thinks this over. Sadly.
Yeah, if you could be a fly on the wall in that car in those moments when he entered it and before he got out with that gun, Proceed.
On the floor of Belachheb's car was a bottle of low-grade whiskey and a box of hollow point 9mm bullets. Also in the car was the Smith & Wesson handgun he had purchased a year earlier. After sitting in the car for at least 15 minutes, Belachheb exited his vehicle and walked toward the front door of Ianni's, armed with his pistol and 2 full magazines. The live band was on a break, and one of the members was attempting to pay his bar tab when Belachheb brushed by him and stopped a few feet from Marcell Ford. A band member observed him pull the pistol from under his jacket, cycle the slide, and eject a live round onto the floor. Why Belachheb ejected a live round is unknown. Perhaps he was not aware his pistol already contained a chambered round, or he performed the cycling action in order to look and sound intimidating. Cycling the slide on a semi-automatic handgun is a trope often used in movies and television for effect, but anyone remotely familiar with firearms knows that this is an unnecessary action and may result in wasting a functioning round.
I'm glad you brought that up, because how many times do we see in movies with, like special forces type people, and then they always jack around in before they make entry.
Right, and anyone who uses guns knows you got your gun loaded already. You don't, it's for effect, right?
Because it looks cool and it does look intimidating.
Yeah, because in the old days you cock your revolver. Well, we don't have that with a semi-automatic handgun, especially like one that doesn't have an external hammer. So you got to do something to,
Yeah, well, I would like to say some of these technical advisors on these like movies that you see people do that, there has to be someone say, hey, that's kind of unnecessary, because there's already a round jacked in, especially somebody that's very familiar with guns, and especially somebody that's either a cop, they're portraying a cop in a movie, or some special forces guy that's about to go into a compound. They would not be doing that.
No, but and you wonder, did he see that on TV or a movie or something? He either thought, I need to cycle the slide, or did he think, this is going to get my point across before I start shooting? Or
it is the equivalent of like with somebody with a shotgun that jacks around in, on a shotgun, because it does sound intimidating and it will get people's attention.
Yeah. Eyewitness accounts of critical incidents often differ from one another, even among those who are standing in almost the same positions at the time of the incident. This is sometimes attributed to untruthfulness, but the reality is most people will go their entire lives without seeing any types of murders, serious car crashes, or similar traumatic events. None of the patrons at Ianni's that night were told beforehand they would be witnesses to a multiple murder, and even if they had, they would not have honed in on every minute detail. This is why some of the accounts of the next few minutes vary. According to some, Belachheb pointed his pistol at Marcell and pulled the trigger without either of them uttering a word. According to others, he said, "I've had enough bullshit from you," to which she replied, "Oh no, Pierre, don't do that," just prior to the first shot. Whatever was said or was not said, Marcell was shot twice and immediately fell to the floor, landing on the right side of the stool she had been perched upon. Belachheb then went down the bar, shooting people in a line. Chaos ensued as the bar room was lit by muzzle flashes. Linda Lowe was shot and dropped straight down. The entry wound indicates that she may have swiveled her stool to attempt escape with no avail. Janice likely moved about 10 feet to her left before Belachheb shot her in the left thigh. She likely would have survived, but this had been her only wound. He then fired a shot toward 2 employees at another end of the barn, but these rounds missed and they were able to crawl into the kitchen. Belachheb then faced Legia and fired the first shot at seemingly point-blank range to her face. Joe Manassi attempted to get up and move, but Belachheb shot him in the face at point-blank range as well. At this point, it is believed his pistol malfunctioned or jammed. He retreated into the foyer of Ianni's and got his firearm working again, likely by cycling the slide, as an unspent cartridge was located there during the subsequent police investigation. Several patrons initially believed Belachheb had left, but then observed him returning to the bar room. The female singer of the quartet crawled into the office, closed the door, and called for police. Initially answered by the Farmers Branch Police Department dispatch, her call was rerouted to Dallas, and officers were dispatched to that location. Belachheb now had to step over people he had already shot in order to navigate the room. He walked up behind Janice, said, "Take that bitch," and shot her in the back of the head. He then sought Legia again, although she was likely already dead. He did something similar to Linda, who was already likely dead as well. During this time, many patrons were able to escape the restaurant to the area outside. A few patrons were still inside, including Frank Parker and John McNeil. John ran in a stooped position and caught a bullet in his lower back. He later attributed his positioning as the bullet struck him to saving his life, as this bullet would have caused fatal damage had it struck him higher. Frank Parker had been in the kitchen during the entirety of the first shooting. He chose to leave the safe confines of that area and, according to a witness, rush at Belachheb in order to stop him. Belachheb shot him in the middle extremities 3 times, and he fell down next to a potted plant and died. The patrons who had escaped the outside saw Belachheb leave and go to his car. While outside, he fired one more shot at an Ianni's employee, but missed. He then got into his station wagon and drove away. 6 people inside of Ianni's lay dead and another one wounded. The medical examiner would later determine 3 of the dead were killed by contact wounds, meaning the barrel of the pistol was in contact with their flesh when the bullets were fired. A waitress at the location would describe Belachheb as very calm from the minute he started to the minute he finished.
I didn't realize that his gun had malfunctioned and he had to make it work again.
Yeah, it's interesting on that he had gone out to the foyer and done something, and then it's another fork in the road. He could have left at that point, like, okay, I've made my point, but no, he decided to go in and inflict more carnage and chaos.
Yeah, then even going up to the ones that he had already shot, and they were down, just for good measure, to make sure they're dead.
Yeah, that's pure evil right there is what that is. I mean, I don't know how you say anything else. It's overkill and it's just evil. In 1984, the Dallas Police Department's Patrol Bureau was divided into 5 geographic divisions. The address where Ianni's was located now sits in the North Central Patrol Division, but that would not exist for another 2 years. After the initial call was answered by the nearby suburb of Farmers Branch and rerouted to Dallas PD Dispatch, Officers Thomas Hall, badge 4298, and Catherine Arnott, badge 4642, of the Northwest Patrol Division would be the first 2 DPD officers dispatched. They arrived at Ianni's at 12:21 a.m. Dozens of more officers would arrive, along with Dallas Fire Department personnel and ambulances. John McNeil was quickly loaded into an ambulance and driven to a hospital in Farmers Branch. Marcell Ford was also loaded into an ambulance and driven to Parkland Memorial Hospital. She was pronounced dead on arrival. All of the other victims were attended to by paramedics, but declared dead at the scene. Uniformed patrol officers quickly secured the scene and began separating and interviewing witnesses. Plainclothes detectives from the Dallas Police Department's Crimes Against Persons Division arrived and set to the immediate task of finding the person who had just murdered 6 people, wounded another, and fled into the night.
You mentioned Officer Tom Hall, and he was the first to respond that night. We actually tracked him down, as fate would have it. He had retired as an officer from DPD. He actually was a long time in the Dallas PD mounted unit. He retired for several years, and now recently he just hired back to be the barn manager. And we sat down with Tom, and this is his account.
All right, sir, go ahead and tell us your name.
Tom Hall.
And your badge number is and was?
4298.
And on June 29th, 1984, how long had you been working for the Dallas Police Department?
I got on in 77. I went through the academy at 19 when I was in 79.
Where were you assigned that night?
Northwest. I did the first from 79 to 87. About like 8 years or a little more, I guess.
Do you recall your beat assignment?
I want to say it was 536. The 530s ran all the way from, like I said, Northwest Highway to LBJ. And I want to say it was like 536. I'm not positive. But
So right around midnight or so, you got a call at 12801 Midway at the Ianni's. Do you recall what the first call you received, what they said over the air?
Yeah, they said it was a disturbance.
Just inside a disturbance?
It was fighting or arguing, just a disturbance.
And then what happened as you were driving to the call?
Yeah, it didn't take long, and then an additional information came out from the dispatcher that it was a man with a gun.
So when you arrived there, what did you encounter?
More than I expected. In other words, they had stepped it up an additional time after that. Shots were fired. So at least 2 different instances where we kind of stepped it up a little bit, but I was still a little hesitant to believe that it was as bad as what it sounded. When I got there, there were 2 or 3 people that were coming out, running out to the squad car, trying to encourage me to move a little faster, get more ambulances, do this. Oh, it's horrible. And at the time, I guess in my mind, I was kind of downplaying it a little bit. I wasn't expecting quite what I saw when I walked in the front door.
What did you see when you walked in?
It was quite visible that at least the 3 of the people at the very front part of the bar, closest to the front door, had all been shot in the head.
And you could see that from the front door as you walked up?
Almost, yes.
Yeah. What did you do once you got there? You were the first one there, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I had a female officer working with me. Someone that I don't think I had ever worked with her before. She was new. She was a rookie, as I recall.
Was that Thornton, Catherine Thornton?
Arnott Thornton, yes. Did an excellent job helping me. When I first walked in there, the first victim, and I know y'all can call these guys by name. I don't remember them. I've got them written down here. I guess I should do that. I'll let y'all make the names. I'll just tell you. I called them, as I got to them. But he was slumped over the bar in a large pool of blood on the bar. He was still seated in his bar stool, and his head was laying on the bar. I want to say they were double hit in the head. I'm not sure if one of them was, or all 3 or 4 of them at the front of the bar there were, but it was a mess, I'll put it that way.
Well, when you went in, you said you attended to the victims, and you were describing the first guy you saw slumped onto the stool. Did you do anything like go up and check to see if he was still alive? I mean, it's probably pretty evident.
It was very evident that he was. I mean, like you could the wounds were significant to the head, and then the pool of blood covered from front to back almost across the bar. And then the next two or three that I came to, one of the females, when I tried to roll her over to check, make sure she was okay, it really wasn't a need to do that either, because you could tell she was shot in the head also. But one of them, I rolled over, and it was like it was obvious she was deceased, but air came out of her when I rolled her over.
Gurgle,
she exhaled, I guess, basically what was left in her as I rolled her over. And then the next one, I want to say, when I rolled her over, part of her jaw and dentures and whatnot fell out of her face. So it was an ugly scene, you know.
And you saw the first 3 to 4 right in the front.
Yes.
Did you kind of continue through the bar to clear it?
I did, yeah. And like I said, I guess it was the first 4. I guess it was the male and then 3 females. And then they were, like I was describing them, they were obvious I couldn't help anybody. So as I went around the bar, the next one that I came to was the lady that got into a tiff with the guy to begin with, you know. And to be quite honest with you, she was sitting up. She had 3 or 4 people helping her. She had like a gunshot wound, I want to say, high in her chest, and then she got nicked in the chin. But she was sitting up and she was talking, and so I just said, well, and she had people helping her, so I went on to check because I had 2 more victims at that time.
And you didn't know if the suspect was still there, right, at that time?
I really didn't. I guess I couldn't have been sure. Right. They told me that he had gotten in and that he had driven off, that he had escaped him, you know, prior to me getting there. So.
Okay. And then it started raining police coming to help?
Probably. I didn't notice until I had checked all of those victims. I don't remember exactly when the next cop got there. I do remember being surrounded by, you know, a bunch of help by the time it all got toward the middle of the crime scene. But the next victim was a guy that he got shot in he was lower back. He was shot in the lower back, but he was talking, you know, and I went back behind the bar, and I grabbed a bar towel and went to the ice machine, filled it up with ice, and shoved it underneath his shirt where he had been shot, and went on because there was still more, clear. You know. It just kept thinking, you know, I'm going to get done with this in a minute, you know. But the last one, which was the guy that was a heavy-set guy trying to run out the back door, and he got shot in the back, he was deceased also. So once I had checked on all of them, and they were all at least being tended to some degree, then I started realizing, that the cops had come in to help me out. Yeah.
So when you respond to this and you're going through it, there was one that actually got shot. There was 7 shot and 6 had passed away.
Yes.
And then
shot.
And one
shot
lived.
7, killed 6.
Yep.
Do you remember how long it took for the first ambulance to get there?
Not really. You know, like I said, that was one of the things that everybody was screaming at me when I first got there, and was that I was going to need more ambulances. I was going to need more ambulances, and I can't really remember another call before where I needed multiple ambulances, maybe a fatality wreck or on the freeway or something, but not at a shooting. After they had told me that and we had ordered multiple ambulances, I remember quite obviously we weren't going to let anybody get out of there until crime scene and everything had been there, so we weren't going to let them go yet, so.
Was this the most chaotic scene you've ever been to? You've been through a lot.
No.
Okay.
No. The only reason why I say that is because later in '87, when I went to the mounted unit, I worked I worked 3, believe it or not, when the Cowboys were winning, I worked 3.
Oh, the parades.
I was about to say, I
Cowboy
bet.
parades,
Yeah.
guarded probably 3 or 4 presidents, the Queen, all on horseback. Probably one of the thickest crowds and hectic situations. Thickest crowd anyway was a free Van Halen concert down in the West End one time there. So as far as this was all over with, right?
Yeah.
The danger level was gone by that time.
But the others were static and fluid, and they were they were
big
active.
Event, big events where anything could happen at any time. This one was gory. This one was hard to look at. But the danger was gone by the time I got there.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you have any clue that this was the largest loss of life in one incident in Dallas history?
Not at the moment. No, I really wasn't thinking in those terms. I asked my supervisor at the time, Don Gear. Bad number was 1269. He was on when Kennedy got shot. The man was just absolutely phenomenal. I'm about to choke up talking about him. He was one of my favorite people in the world. Raised me, basically. Knew him before I got on the department. So he was there, and I asked him, I'm like, "You've been around a long time, man. You ever seen anything like this?" And he said, "No." Pretty much was his answer, that he was a man of few words, and he didn't have anything to say about the incident. He was that kind of supervisor. He would tell you yes or no and expected you to be able to handle your business. But,
he was all business.
He was all business, yes, sir. Old school business, yes. Looking back on it, and looking at it, I know that it was the beginning. I think me and Sarge talked about. You didn't hear these multiple shootings, these mass shootings, these school shootings. This was the first. And then I think in California, a guy ran through a McDonald's with a car or something and killed some people. It started. Some of those things started after this, and we talked about how the law changed. Yes. There were certain crimes you committed in the commission of a murder that made it capital murder, but murder in the commission of another murder was not capital murder.
That is extremely crazy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was at the time too. But so and then of course the episode of 2020 when it was on, it ended up, in hindsight, looking back on it, it was quite historical. I really wasn't thinking about that at the time though. When you walk in on that kind of scene, it's one of them things, where you just it's hard to forget a large event in somebody's life. Shot 7, killed 6. That's a pretty big deal.
Thank you, Tom Hall. That was great. Police work is mostly reactive. It is nearly impossible for anyone to predict when a crime is going to occur, especially a crime committed in a fit of rage. The criminal almost always has the advantage of being several steps ahead of the police. Sergeant Bill Parker, badge 2055 of the Homicide Unit, was awakened in the middle of the night to assemble his team of detectives and first identify an unknown suspect, second, find the suspect in a very large metropolitan area, and third, arrest and book the suspect. Task number 1 seemed almost impossible upon first look. Belachheb was a bit of a mystery man who had not used his real name with any of the Ianni's crowd. His residence and any information regarding his acquaintances was unknown to anyone at the scene. Fortunately for Bill Parker, he would catch a huge break within about 15 minutes of arriving at Ianni's that night. All criminals make mistakes, especially when they are desperate, and Abdelkrim Belachheb's trail of mistakes would lead police to him very quickly. A little after 12:30 a.m., Officer Thomas Haney, badge 4766, responded to a motor vehicle crash on Bryson Drive in the Lake Highlands area of Dallas. The 9,000 block of Bryson runs between a park, a greenbelt, and a neighborhood of homes, and this was where Haney found an abandoned white Chevrolet Caprice wagon with its passenger side resting against a utility pole. Both passenger side doors were severely damaged, the rear passenger side window was completely gone, and a tire was deflated. Officer Haney, as all sharp and observant cops do, shined his flashlight into the vehicle's passenger compartment and immediately noticed a bullet on the front seat. Further examination of the vehicle by flashlight revealed a box of 9mm bullets and a bottle of whiskey. The rearview mirror was ajar, and a clump of Belachheb's toupee was stuck in it. By this time, reports of the shooting at Ianni's had been broadcast citywide, and Officer Haney realized this vehicle was likely related to that incident. Bill Parker was notified and responded to the scene of the crash as quickly as he could. Upon arriving, he searched the car's messy interior and found multiple papers with different addresses for Charlie, none of which were close to the vehicle's location. Parker then found a job application listing Mohammed as a reference and a checkbook with Belachheb's name in the piles of junk. Both of these documents listed an address of 10906 Listy Drive, which was about 600 feet from where Bill Parker was standing at that moment.
It's like you said, criminals always leave clues behind.
Yeah.
And this guy takes off in that shitty station wagon, and
he can't even make it. He can't even make it the last 600 feet to where he's trying to go. Just crashes into a utility pole, and his toupee, or just toupee as we like to refer to it, gets gummed up in the mirror there.
What's funny about this guy is he is a career criminal, but he's not a very good one. He's a clumsy career criminal, and he runs off rage. He's not calculating, obviously,
or planning. Like he didn't. I mean, he has a plan, but it's not a long-term plan. Like he didn't think, okay, I'll do this, and then I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to fly back to Morocco, and I'll be out of here. Like he didn't have this lined up.
No, he's not. He is not James Bond like. But it is funny you mentioned the thing that he does plan out most is probably his affixing that toupee.
Yes,
or toupee.
Yeah, even his hair is fake, as it turns out. He's this nice head of hair we saw in these pictures. Like the pictures that you see after he's booked in, he's bald on top. Like everything about this guy was phony.
Yeah, that didn't happen overnight. Even that gray fancy 3-piece suit that he stole off somebody's card.
Yeah, probably lost his hair from years of lying and put some stress on you.
Actions by Belachheb in 1984 had a ripple effect through many families and friends that to this day are still being felt.
Oh yeah, we'll find that out here shortly. How this is taking a path for somebody's life even after this. As it turned out, Belachheb's flight from the parking lot at Ianni's had taken him east on LBJ Freeway before exiting into the Lake Highlands area of Dallas and trying to navigate himself back to the first home he had resided in upon arriving in the city. In his desperation and intoxicated state, he had failed to navigate the curves of Bryson Drive, hopped a curb, and run his station wagon against a light pole. He abandoned his vehicle and fled, but not before being noticed by several residents who had been awakened by the sound of the crash. Running to the home of the first people who had welcomed him to Dallas, he arrived to find the residents awake, as they were eating an iftar meal and enjoying a movie. Mohammed, the man who had welcomed Belachheb into his home as a long-term guest upon his arrival in Dallas, answered the door. Belachheb pointed his pistol at Mohammed, who yelled for help. They then wrestled for the firearm. Mohammed was able to get the gun away, at which point Belachheb said, "Kill me. I came to kill you." After a brief conversation, Belachheb said, "I killed some people in a bar on Midway." This was initially met by unbelief, and Belachheb entered the home and began begging for the gun back, stating he had a list of people he needed to kill before he killed himself. Mohammed refused to give him the gun back and hid it between a mattress and box spring in another room. Belachheb then laid down and recounted his deeds at Ianni to those present. Stating his life was finished, he reasoned he had several days before police would catch up with him. At approximately 2:15 a.m., a little over 2 hours after the shootings, Bill Parker and his team approached the house on Listy Drive. They encountered a woman smoking a cigarette in the front yard and asked her, "Where's Charlie?" She replied he was in the house. They then asked about the weapon, and she said they had taken it from him. After a few more questions, Bill Parker and his partner entered the house and approached the rear bedroom where the woman told them Belachheb was hiding. Both men approached with their service revolvers drawn, and Bill Parker kicked the door. Belachheb and Mohammed were inside. Belachheb was on the mattress with his head in his hands. Parker gave verbal commands to both men, then quickly realized which was Belachheb, as he was wearing the same suit described to him by the witnesses at Ianni's. He was ordered onto the ground and searched. A fully loaded 9mm magazine was in the left pocket of his suit. His pant legs were coated in blood, bone fragments, and brain matter. Bill Parker's partner, Detective Paul Lashnet, badge 2812, placed Belachheb in handcuffs and escorted him to a police car. After being read his Miranda rights, Belachheb responded only with a question: "How did you catch me so fast?" Bill Parker and Paul Lashnet were not familiar with the area of town they found themselves in, and were trying to make their way back downtown with their suspect. Belachheb interjected himself and gave them better directions than their map-reading attempts were rendering. During the trip downtown, Belachheb told Parker and Lashnet, "I had a vision that I killed some people tonight." Abdelkrim Belachheb was escorted into the Dallas Police Department's headquarters at 106 South Harwood Street at 3:30 a.m., through the same basement where Lee Harvey Oswald had been shot by Jack Ruby 21 years earlier. The investigation was relatively brief for such a horrific event. All eyewitnesses picked Belachheb out as the shooter. The murder weapon had been recovered. Belachheb's clothes were covered in blood and tissue from his victims. His friends on Listy all said he had told them he was the shooter. Bill Parker made the decision not to interrogate Belachheb, as he had no desire to do so and did not see the point. His case was as airtight as one could hope for.
Dun, dun, dun. Little they know that there's going to be a lot of twists and turns in this story.
Yeah, and the twists aren't so much with the case. They did an excellent job that night. I mean, this was textbook police work. And really quick for what it was. I mean, you would have thought this would go on for days. I mean, this guy, nobody knew who this guy even was, and we got him nabbed and in jail in 3 hours.
It was an interesting comment he made about having visions of murdering people.
Yeah.
Do you think he was already laying the groundwork for the defense that we're about to hear about?
Yeah, and that's what he had done that his whole life. It's like, oh, I don't remember what I did, or I had a vision that I did something, and I didn't really do this. It was just all in my mind.
Yeah, or he could fall back on the defense of taking Ambien and not knowing what you wake up and there's 3 bodies around you.
Yeah, I have no idea what I did. I'm not responsible for any of this.
Fascinating.
Damn fool. The day of the Ianni's Massacre was the 12-year anniversary of the United States Supreme Court, handing down a 5-4 ruling in favor of the appellant in the case of Furman versus Georgia. This 1972 ruling had declared existing laws regarding capital punishment in the United States invalid, and all death sentences throughout the nation were commuted to life imprisonment. By 1974, Texas had reinstituted the death penalty to comply with the guidelines the Supreme Court had implemented. In 1982, the state carried out the first capital punishment under the new laws, also making it the first state to use lethal injection as a form of execution. Prior to the new guidelines, the death penalty could be imposed for non-homicidal crimes, but after the court's ruling, the new Texas statute allowed the death penalty only for murder and only in the following circumstances: 1. The murder of a peace officer or firefighter discharging official duties. 2. Murder committed during the course of a kidnapping, burglary, robbery, sexual assault, or arson. 3. Murder for hire. Or 4. Murder while escaping a penal institution or in the murder of a prison employee committed by a prisoner. Since Belacheb's actions did not meet any of these circumstances, he would not be eligible for the death penalty. Had he taken any property from any of the patrons at Ianni's that night, his actions could have constituted robbery, and he would have no doubt been sentenced to death upon conviction. But since his act was simply shooting people out of rage with no other purpose, he could not be placed on Texas' infamous death row. Most in the general public assumed Belacheb was going to be subject to the death penalty, so the subsequent outrage from learning the stiffest possible punishment would be taxpayer-funded prison for the rest of his natural life sparked outrage. At the time of the massacre, approximately 66% of U.S. citizens favored the death penalty, and even those who opposed it could see a strong argument for it in this case. Regardless of the possible punishment, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office now took the task of prosecuting Belacheb for the murders. Bill Parker and his team gathered the evidence and turned it over to the county for prosecution. Famed Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade selected Norman Kine, a no-nonsense prosecutor with a reputation for tearing a defense apart, to lead the prosecution of Belacheb. For Belacheb's defense, he had no money, so his case was initially assigned to Ted Khaleesi, one of Dallas County's public defenders. The evidence against Belacheb was overwhelming, and trying to make any claim he was not the gunman would be laughable. The work by DPD had been meticulous and by the book, so attempting to get evidence thrown out on technical grounds would likely prove futile. Therefore, Khaleesi had a few options to try to adequately defend his client. On July 5th, he announced he would be submitting an insanity defense, saying, quote, "We're just talking about a sick person who had been sick for many years and it finally just blew up." Insanity defenses are often misunderstood by the general public. TV, movies, and popular opinion paint the picture they are frequently used and are mostly successful, which results in accused criminals walking out of the courthouse scot-free into the free world. In reality, an insanity defense is hard to mount. The burden of proof for guilt or innocence is the prosecution's. For an insanity defense, this burden belongs to the defense, requiring they prove that the defendant was not only suffering from a mental disease or defect, but that he or she did not know their conduct was wrong because of the disease or defect. This can prove financially costly, as psychiatric examinations and necessary research can add up quickly. Insanity defenses are rare, and even more rare is their success. In the event a defendant's insanity defense is successful, he or she will likely be sent to a mental hospital until a judge deems them fit to re-enter society. Unfortunately, or possibly fortunately, for Khaleesi, his tenure in this matter would be short-lived. On August 14, 1984, Frank Jackson, a former football player turned lawyer who had also been named one of the top 10 defense attorneys in Dallas, announced he would take Belacheb's case pro bono. Jackson would also personally assume the extensive costs of hiring expert testimony to build an insanity case. A reenactment of Belacheb's actual trial would probably not make for a compelling TV show or movie. The guilt or innocence phase began on November 2, 1984, and concluded 5 days later. The prosecution methodically laid out the evidence from beginning to end, then rested its case. It was then Frank Jackson's turn. Jackson never disputed the facts of the incident. He instead spent the next 2 days bringing before the court a panel of doctors and experts on mental health to lay out the case for Belacheb being mentally deficient and therefore not responsible for his actions. Norman Kine was then allowed to counter with a group of his own experts to convince the jury Belacheb was perfectly sane. Among these was Dr. James Grigson, who was famously nicknamed Dr. Death for his roles in securing capital punishment in cases where that option was on the table. After much back and forth, the jury began its deliberations on November 14th. The next day they reached unanimous verdicts of guilty for each of the 6 murder charges. Belachheb received sentences of life in prison, but due to the same laws in place at the time which kept him off death row, he would be eligible for parole on June 29th of 2004.
It's interesting. We see this a lot where high-powered attorneys take on cases pro bono more because they know it's a
notoriety.
It's notoriety, and it's basically a walking, talking billboard in the media that you're taking a case that defense attorneys do this a lot.
Yeah.
And
you're also taking a gamble because you're probably going to lose. Like this one, I mean, he had an uphill battle.
But your name is out there a lot more.
That's true. Like, hey, I did the best I could for this guy, and he killed these people. There wasn't much to it.
There's so many doctors in history that get named Dr. Death for different reasons.
Yeah, really. Have you done much research on Grigson?
No.
Read about him? He's interesting. The movie The Thin Blue Line, it's about the killing of Robert Wood. He came into the play on that one.
What was his role?
He argued for what's his face? The guy that was convicted. He argued that he should receive the death penalty, and the whole controversy with him was that he basically, if the prosecution said, "Hey, we want the death penalty for this guy," he'd be like, "Oh yeah, he's a danger to society," and he would almost just rubber stamp it. That was what they said anyway.
It's like
it was probably a little more complicated,
like a hanging judge,
Yeah. And he'd come up there and say, "Oh yeah, this person is sociopathic, and if he's released into society, he'll kill more people." And I'm sure that was his role here, was also saying, "Look, this guy, there's nothing wrong with this guy. He knew what he was doing," and fortunately, it worked. So,
one thing that kind of, I didn't bring it up earlier when we talked, but you saying that this shooting happened just 21 years after the Kennedy assassination, it's kind of chilling.
That is.
To think. I mean, here we are, we're 60 years. I don't know. This is still crazy that was that short of a time frame.
And there were a lot of officers on the department that were either had just started or had been on for several years when that happened.
Well, Bill Parker, I would imagine. Yeah.
They were all pretty. They knew that case, and some of them may have even been in that basement when Oswald was shot. I don't know.
When I hired on, that's where I had to do my physical agility test, is down in that basement.
Yeah.
Of where Oswald was shot.
Yeah, we were still using that building until the new millennium here, the 2000s. It's crazy.
And now it's a courthouse, and it's a beautiful building. It hasn't changed much, and it's now where they have municipal court.
Yeah, we didn't. I like that we didn't tear something down in Dallas. We have a history of tearing things down, so I'm glad we preserved that building.
It is a very beautiful building, and
very historic.
It served the city in a lot of ways for many, many years, and it's still doing it.
Yeah, I believe it was very dated, that building. Just on a side note, I remember reading something about a study that was done by an outside firm back in, I think, in the 50s or 60s, and they said this building is outdated and needs to be replaced, and we still used it for like 50 more years and probably reconfigured a door or something here and there, but that was about it.
Yeah, we actually have an original door from that building, from the homicide unit.
Yeah, it's a famous door.
Famous door. Proceed.
The 69th Texas legislative session was set to commence on January 8th of 1985. An amendment of the state's list of homicidal acts which were death penalty eligible quickly became a top priority. Soon after Belachheb's conviction, Democratic State Representative Tony Palumbo of the Houston area's 128th State District submitted a bill for the next legislative session which would become House Bill 8. Republican State Representative Patricia Hill of the 102nd District in Dallas would co-sponsor this piece of legislation, giving it bipartisan support. The bill received little opposition as it moved through committee and was passed by the Texas House of Representatives on March 12, 1985, 256 days after Abdelkrim Belachheb's massacre. The new legislation, which made mass murder punishable by the death penalty, also made serial killing a capital felony. A portion of the bill which would have made it a capital offense to commit murder if someone had a previous conviction for murder had been nixed prior to passage. This bill was moved through the state Senate in April, and Governor Mark White signed it into law shortly after. Today, a murderer in Texas may be eligible for the death penalty for the previously mentioned conditions, as well as several other circumstances such as the murder of a child under the age of 10 and murder of a judge in act of retaliation. All of these additions to the law have stories and criminal court cases behind them which led to change.
It's still fascinating to me that this
Slipped through the cracks?
it slipped through the cracks. That law slipped through the cracks. That murder in the commission of murder, as Tom Hall put it, was not a death penalty case.
Well, and as Tom Hall also brought up, this whole thing of mass killing. I mean, you look through history and you see this wasn't the first time. It wasn't like this all started in the 80s, but it was very rare. And you had this happen. But around the 80s is when you started seeing these mass shootings, like the thing in San Ysidro, California, that the guy shot up the McDonald's and killed a bunch of people. And
then also the Lubies in Killeen, Texas.
Yeah,
that was another that he just went in and opened fire on patrons just sitting there eating.
Yeah,
and a lot of them are older citizens.
Well, that incident led to the concealed handgun. I mean, that was kind of the impetus for the concealed handgun laws, because at that time you couldn't carry a gun unless you were a peace officer, and people were like, "Hey, if I'd had a gun, I could have stopped this thing." And so I think that happened. I don't remember what year that happened, but it wasn't long after that the legislation to allow concealed handgun permits in Texas went into effect.
We watched that video of the investigations of the Lubies in the academy. Yeah. They actually played it, and it was on VHS, and it was really eerie as the investigator that was going through the restaurant, and people were just sitting there in their boots still, head back, some of them face down into the table, and the elevator music was just playing in the background.
Yeah, they didn't cut the music.
They didn't cut the music. It was just so eerie and creepy.
Yeah, there's something weird about that. I've seen those videos of 9/11 before, I think, the second plane hit, and that plaza that was down below, that people are clearing out, and it's still playing that the world is love music or whatever. It's always creepy when you see that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know what there was a live band at Ianni's that night on this deal, so I'm sure they didn't come into hearing music, but that would have been really weird if there'd been house music going when you're in there trying to investigate 6 murders.
Yeah, it's interesting today that he would have been eligible for parole in 2004.
Yeah. He killed 6 people, and you can get out in 20 years, possibly, if you're good.
Possibly. That guy, he more than likely wouldn't have gotten out, but I'm glad that Texas did the right thing and fixed years old oversights, and charges.
In tales of murder, the victims always seem forgotten. Focus is placed on the offender and his or her backstory, childhood, and civil rights. In death penalty cases, much is made about the murderer's past, and why he did what he did, and how wrong it would be to punish him with execution. Even in cases where the ultimate penalty is not imposed, incarcerated criminals sometimes seem to receive more sympathy than their victims. Abdelkrim Belachheb received no compassion from the public or any advocacy groups. His crime was horrendous, and he was the antithesis of a sympathetic figure. His attempts to portray himself as a victim of his society had failed, and he would spend the rest of his life in a hot Texas prison with no one to advocate for his release. Lost in all of this were the 6 people whose lives he took. Abdelkrim Belachheb was able to write his memoirs, give interviews, write his will, live and breathe air. Marcell Ford was never afforded that opportunity. Neither was Linda Lowe, Legia Kozlowski, Frank Parker, Joe Manassi, or Janice Smith. These people are seemingly lost to history, and what we can learn about them fills up little of this story. This story should be more about them, but because their lives were snuffed out by a violent con artist, we know little of them, but have a plethora of information about Abdelkrim Belachheb's pointless life. The families of these victims buried their loved ones and had to continue going about their lives with heartache and pain most of us can never imagine. The true definition of a tragedy is a situation in which no one wins. The loss in this case was greater than anyone could bear.
I'm glad you mentioned the family. Because we're about to sit with somebody that is family to one of the victims, and to this day, in 2025, she and her family are still affected by what happened by this guy in 1984. We just heard a long story of really just a piece of shit guy that led to a tragedy in 1984. And we do want to end this with how it affects the families and generations of family. And we actually are sitting with somebody that her family's directly affected by this guy's actions. Marcell Ford, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
You know, we go way back to 2015. We started working together on the CRT, and now, I mean, we became quick friends.
Yep.
And we still are to this day. And you are now our sergeant in the fugitive unit, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't call me sir.
Sorry, it's a habit.
I did a post a few weeks ago, just kind of teasing this episode. Sergeant Mosier and I, we've been working on this for a while, and we really didn't know how it was going to go. This is something totally different for this show. When you're combining scripted material with conversation, but throughout this whole process, we have found these little forks in the road that oh crap, like Tom Hall, we didn't realize he was already still in the department. And then I do a post, and I have to say that I got chills whenever I read it, that you said, that's the guy that killed my aunt. What did you think whenever you saw that post on Facebook?
I was surprised, honestly. That's usually just a part of my family history that is not something I think of every day. Usually when I've only seen that photo of him maybe less than a handful of times in my life, but usually when I do see that photo, for some reason, for me, it's fear when I see it. So,
because we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
That's how you basically, because of his actions, that's a lot of how you were raised, were influenced by this night.
Yeah, that night is pretty much sculpted how my upbringing and who I am today.
Before we get into your connection to the story, I want you to kind of tell the listener how long you've been on the department and where you work now.
I've been on for 17 years. I'm currently assigned to the fugitive unit as a sergeant, going after the worst of the worst. That's always been my goal, and I finally got here.
When I got to admit, when I got to that team, Foy was our sergeant. I didn't know anybody on the team, but I had heard of you, and I heard that you had a good reputation. And you and I, we pretty much hit it off right off the bat. Yeah,
it was nice to work with someone that had the same eye that I did out in the field.
We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Foy wouldn't ever let us ride together. Yeah, he'll listen, but I don't care. But he would never let us ride together.
I don't know why we just didn't leave with other partners and then during the day just end up in the same car. We should have just...
I know. We were too honest.
Yeah.
No, it was a lot of fun, and we've built on that relationship and friendship since then. And and I have to say, when I saw your response to that post, I got chills, and I immediately I took a screenshot and sent it to the Sarge, and then both of us were like, "Wow, this has to, we have to go a different direction in this."
Yeah, when we first started looking into this, and we noticed the names, we saw Marcell Ford. And Joe and I were like, wow, that's quite the coincidence. I mean, it was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's like how is that possible? Because the spelling is the same, and it is a unique name.
Definitely.
So, we shrugged it off as a coincidence and thought, interesting. And as it turns out, it wasn't.
So you are named after your aunt.
I'm first name, not the middle name, but first name named after her. So, my dad always told me that the weird thing that my aunt had always told him before she was killed, he always said, she always told him if she ever died before he had a kid, to name his daughter after her. It's the weirdest thing. And so the whole time when my mother was pregnant, my dad was like, it's going to be a girl and this is going to be her name. It's very odd that my aunt even thought of that to say that to him.
Well, as we've found in life and dealing with a lot of different things, even like the uniqueness of this whole situation, what brought you to the table here today, I mean, sometimes fate lines up in weird ways. you and I have talked offline about how this has affected your family for so many years. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So my aunt, from what I could understand as growing up, was going to be the new pillar of the family once my grandmother was going to pass over the bar or the liquor store, because my grandfather was murdered in 1978. And my dad really depended on my grandmother for care. He's not someone that should have been a business owner, so it was going to go to my aunt. But this event took away what plans or generational wealth would have been for my family. Because when my grandmother eventually passed away, the ability for her restaurant and her bar to succeed wasn't going to be able to be come to fruition under my dad's care. He did what he could, but he eventually sold it. But I do feel that if my aunt was there, or this didn't happen to her, that what my grandmother built for my family, I probably still would be benefiting from it today.
Yeah, and your dad, I mean, he obviously was close with his sister.
He was very close. He loved her a lot.
Was she older?
She was older.
She was the older sister?
Yeah.
No offense to anybody involved, but not everybody is entrepreneur. Not everybody can be a cop. Not everybody can be a parent.
Right.
You know, and this took a shock. Your family had a shock to the system whenever this happened. I mean, you already, in this city, you mentioned your grandfather was murdered in 1978.
Yes.
At the liquor store.
Yes. It was a robbery gone bad, from what I understand.
Yeah, and Sarge and I took a deeper dive into that murder from 1978, and it is still unsolved to this day.
Yeah, we never got any answers.
Yeah, that occurred on November 11th of 1978, and he was gunned down, and as of today, it is still an unsolved murder in the city of Dallas. Now, your family owned that corner of San Jacinto and Ross, is that correct?
Yes.
That was y'all's property?
Yes.
Wow. Which is a valuable piece of property today. So I see what you mean about the missing out on the generational wealth. Just that square
just
of
where it was,
parcel alone is worth a lot.
So you mentioned to me too that you also, how this incident changed your life, your upbringing, and then who you ended up becoming. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
From my earliest childhood with my dad has always been, I would say, I would say a hermit crab, as a result of, losing two family members to murder.
In this city.
So when he had me, he's always been overly just trying to keep me safe and make me aware. We used to sit on the porch and watch Cocker Hill PD do traffic stops. And so us doing that and him talking about how they, can protect themselves, kind of started putting that in my mind of, maybe that's the direction I need to go in, since he's always instilling in me, pay attention to what's around you, pay attention to who's walking around you, don't be rude to people because you don't know what's going to happen. My dad put that, I wouldn't say paranoia, but just be aware of your surroundings so you can survive is what he always tried to instill in me.
He instilled hypervigilance.
Yes. Hypervigilance would be very accurate.
Growing up, you had you can't blame him for he has seen two major tragedies within his own family, and then you're the daughter, and you're named after his sister.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to lose you as well.
No. And when I told him I was going to DPD, he wasn't too happy because he was like, really? You're going to put yourself in a position where I might lose you too? But I was like, I'll be fine.
That hypervigilance has actually served you well in this profession.
Oh, for sure. And the angel watching above too also helps. But yeah, I do think that from my early childhood of learning how to watch out for yourself, it does, transpose to being a police officer.
The symbolism of being a Dallas police officer, especially of what your family's history here has been, tragedy, how important is that?
Yeah, I never looked at any other agency. I grew up in Dallas. I love Dallas. I'll always take care of Dallas. Like, I always put 110% of whatever someone's asking us to do to make us as safe as possible, so no one has to deal with what my family's dealt with.
And you also carry that Marcell Ford name too.
Yes.
Marcell, since I've known you and closely and worked around you, I can honestly say from the outside looking in that you have served that Marcell Ford name very admirably, and you should be very proud of the work you've done.
I appreciate it.
You come a long way growing up in the Cliff. Tons of family tragedy. The city of Dallas has given your family a lot, but they've taken away much more.
Yeah, the trajectory from my grandfather being murdered and my aunt as well as, I think, the general wealth that, like I said, my grandma and my grandfather was trying to build for us, it diminished very quickly.
It started in 1978.
Yeah.
Your grandfather, and then in this deal in 84. It's this. We talk offline about literally every crime that happens, every murder that happens, sex assault, a child offense, child abuse. It can be generational. It can affect generations of citizens. And us as officers, we handle these types of calls, and we have to be robotic-like. We have to be, because we have no connection. But this case here, that Sergeant and I just kind of stumbled upon a year and a half ago, it's interesting that it actually literally has, in some ways, connections to us.
Yeah.
And especially when I found out, my heart sank when I found out it wasn't just a coincidence.
Small world.
It's a very small world.
Yeah.
Big city, but very small world within that city.
We're all connected somehow.
We are.
Yeah.
And now you're part of the show. We want to document this crime and the significance of this crime in this city. And I know many other cities have larger loss of lives, and actually some small suburbs around Dallas have had more mass casualties from one incident. But this is still the most in Dallas history. Even with all the crazy events we've had, from the Kennedy assassination to the headquarters attack to July 7th, this case here, which I think has been kind of forgotten in time by a lot of people, but definitely not by the Ford family.
Not at all. Yeah, that was the officers retired that responded out there, or the juries and the judges that dealt with the court proceedings and the legislative stuff that we try to get changed. I'm sure it's all forgotten. I think people now just think it's the norm for the death penalty in the state of Texas, but not realizing where it originated from for us to have that right as a victim of this kind of crime.
If you could say one thing to your aunt, what would you tell her?
I hope that if I do ever get to meet you, that we can... we have a lot of catching up to do. I would love to catch up and get to know somebody that I think I have a lot in common with, and I was never given that opportunity.
Marcell, thank you so much for coming on here. That we really, really appreciate that. Epilogue. Ianni's restaurant never recovered completely after this tragedy. Joe Ianni had immigrated to the United States in the 1920s as a child and opened his first restaurant in Dallas in the 1950s. After his death in 1973, his daughter had taken over the business and opened the upscale Midway Road location bearing the family name in 1983. The restaurant reopened shortly after the massacre of June 29th, but the notoriety was never shaken. Morbid gawkers would come in to see where the tragedy had taken place and be politely asked to leave. Patrons who had been there that night regathered in the bar room in 1985 for the filming of an episode of the ABC News magazine 2020. In that episode, the bar room and furniture were unchanged from that horrible night. By 1986, business had slowed considerably, and a fire sometime that year put the nail in the coffin for Ianni's. After the fire, the space at 12801 Midway Road housed a revolving door of restaurants and clubs. But none ever got much traction, and by the mid-2000s it was empty and falling apart. Part of this was due to the notoriety the space held, but most of this was because the area around there had changed. The boom of the 80s had long ended. The sexy singles-only apartments, which once dotted the nearby landscape, were now low-income housing, and the once hot North Dallas nightclub scene had virtually dried up. In late 2014, the bulk of the strip shopping center where Ianni sat was razed for new development. The strip of concrete where Abdelkrim Belachheb's white Chevrolet Caprice was parked that night is the drive-through lane for a popular fast food restaurant. However, the square-shaped building which once housed Ianni still stands, and possibly in a redemptive twist of fate, the space which was once the scene of mass murder now houses a medical facility. Abdelkrim Belachheb was never granted parole and died in prison in 2017. Where he is buried, I do not know, nor do I care to find out. In preparing for this podcast, I filled my brain with more facts about the meaningless life of Abdelkrim Belachheb, and I do not wish to learn any more about him. As of the date of this recording, there are only 4 sworn officers who were employed by the Dallas Police Department on the night of the Ianni's tragedy. Sergeant Parker left the department in January of 1985, and none of the officers who responded to Ianni's that night or were involved in the subsequent investigation are sworn officers with DPD today. Tom Hall retired as a sworn officer in 2004, but still serves the department as the manager of our mounted units facility. These officers' devotion to duty that night and during the weeks and months that followed led to the perpetrator's quick apprehension and subsequent conviction. This podcast is dedicated to the victims of this terrible tragedy. Marcell Ford, deceased. Linda Lowe, deceased. Janice Smith, deceased. Legia Kozlowski, deceased. Joe Manassi, deceased. Frank Parker, deceased. And John McNeil, who was wounded.
Six lives were snuffed out in this bar, Ianni's by Belachheb.
6 people were killed. A 7th person was seriously injured.
It's a real blow, and everyone really is in a state of shock.
It's shocking. That's a large number of people to be killed at one time.
A sociopath, in other words, who would wantonly kill more than one person. Type of individual that would commit this very heinous type of vicious crime.
Heard the cock of his gun, looked up, and that's when he proceeded to shoot Marcell. At that instant, I felt the concussion or the pressure, the air pressure, hit me in the face from the gunshot.
And I just turned and looked, and I saw him put a gun to the second girl's head. And then the third one, at that time, John grabbed me and threw me down on the floor.
I pulled her back here and threw her down here, and I grabbed some chairs trying to pull them up around her.
And my stomach across the dance floor and just got underneath the baby grand piano. I put my head down by the pedals and just pretended I was dead.
I pulled the chair over and put my protection up because we were sitting ducks. All he had to do was turn around. He was shooting the gun just as fast as he could pull the trigger, really.